Welcome to the final week of Death 101. I'd like to congratulate each of you for making it so far. Now, you'll have in this week an opportunity to apply what you've learned in the previous weeks for meaningful improvements in global health. So how does the week work? Well, first, we will go over the mortality trends in the last 40 years to review what has happened. Then, we will talk about what is possible in reductions in mortality by 2030, based upon a recent publication focusing on 25 priority countries. We will move specifically to a discussion of how could premature deaths be reduced by 40% by 2030. Now, since countries differ greatly in their epidemiological and their health system context, each country needs a specific solution. So to give you an idea, I will illustrate an example for India that I have written to the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. Now, this is where things get interesting. Your final assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to define in a 300-word essay what strategies you would recommend for 9 important countries to reduce premature deaths by 40%. Now, your peers will review these short essays, and the best of these will actually be selected and sent to the prime ministers or presidents of those countries on behalf of the course. So here's your chance to make a real difference by applying the knowledge from this week so that decision makers can actually learn from what you have. Enjoy the week and do well. Your results might be actually used. Let's start by looking over the mortality trends in the last 40 years to understand the patterns. Now, before we look at these statistics, there's 2 important points for you to understand. First, age groups. Global life expectancy around 2010 was about age 70. So we accordingly define premature death as death before age 70 years. However, we have to consider separately the mortality changes in 3 age groups: 0 to 4, or children, 5 to 49, and 50 to 69, because the predominant causes of death differ very much between these 3 groups. Second point is grouping of countries by income. Now, previously we've grouped countries broadly by 3 economic groupings: low, middle, and high income. But this week, we'd like you to focus instead on 4 income groups: low, lower middle, upper middle, and high income. These are the World Bank definitions. By 2030, low-income countries, many of which are currently in Africa, will have about 1 billion people. Lower middle-income countries, including India, will have 3 billion. Upper middle-income countries, including China and Brazil, will have 2.7 billion people. And high-income countries will have about 1.4 billion. So to understand these patterns, let's look at what the changes have been over the last 40 years. Global mortality before age 70 fell substantially between 1970 and 2010, and it fell particularly for the infectious diseases and vaccine-preventable deaths. Deaths declined from non-communicable diseases. However, deaths from injuries, particularly road traffic injuries, declined less. So let's discover these groups in a little more detail. So this graph shows the overall world patterns. And you see in every age group, there were substantial declines at 0 to 4, 5 to 49, and 50 to 69. Now in the next group, in low-income countries, you see substantial declines, particularly in children. In fact, the decline has been faster in low-income countries than in high-income countries. The notable exception that you see at ages 5 to 49 is that step which is due to the effects of HIV, particularly in the 1990s. So overall, it's been favorable in low-income countries. Go over to lower middle-income countries and upper middle-income countries, and you see very comparable patterns. In fact, the same scenario, faster declines in those places than in high-income countries. So the absolute 1970 to 2010 decline in the risk of death at ages 0 to 4 and 5 to 49 years were much steeper in low and middle income countries than in high income countries. But still, there's still substantial risk remaining. The risk of a person age 50 dying at ages 50 to 69 decreased by a third, from 36% to 24% worldwide, and this similar absolute decrease was seen in low and high income countries. So now let's look at particular groups of countries instead of these regions. And they all have even greater differences than you've seen by region. So this graph shows 10 countries' risks of death for ages 5 to 49 between 1970 and 2010. The UK statistics at the end represent the pattern of developed countries, so you can use that to compare the overall differences. Now, the first thing you notice is the huge difference in mortality. South Africa has about a 40% risk of death between ages 5 to 49 versus only 4% in the United Kingdom, a tenfold difference. In large part, in South Africa, the main excess was actually due to HIV. If you look, almost all countries have had substantial declines, except for three notable standouts. So one is the big increase in mortality in South Africa, followed by a more recent decrease. In Russia, you see that mortality fluctuated, but did go up substantially. And look at Iran as to what happened around 1980. A huge increase and then an enormous decrease. Well, what's going on? Well, it's very simple. HIV, vodka, and war. The effects in South Africa are due to HIV. The main effects in Russia are due to the vodka crisis, particularly affecting men, but also women. And in Iran, the big increase was in male mortality because of the war with Iraq in the early 1980s. So an obvious message to achieve low death rates is to avoid HIV, vodka, and war.